Okay? So you want to open a gun store, find a retail space, stock the shelves with firearms, watch the customers walk in and hand you hundreds or thousands of dollars per transaction, and count the money at the end of the day. Walk into any gun store in America, and the display cases alone tell a story that feels like pure profit. A standard polymer-framed pistol sitting under the glass at $600. A modern sporting rifle tagged at $1,200. A precision bolt action at $2,000. A quality optic sitting beside it for another $800. The shelves are stocked with merchandise that costs more per square foot than almost any other retail category in the country. A customer walks in, picks something up, and the transaction is over in less than an hour. Repeat that 40 times a week and the math on the surface seems almost embarrassingly good. So here is the question that actually matters. If the products are this expensive, why isn't owning a gun store automatically one of the most profitable small businesses in America? Why are there roughly 68,000 federally licensed firearms dealers spread across the United States? And why are so many of them perpetually struggling? Why do experienced operators with years of industry knowledge, good locations, and loyal customer bases still find themselves at the end of the year wondering where the money went? The answer is not complicated once you see it, but almost nobody sees it from the outside. What looks like a high-margin retail business from the parking lot is, on the inside, a layered economic structure where expensive products and thin profits coexist, where full shelves and empty bank accounts are not a contradiction but a routine reality, and where the biggest financial problem facing the average gun store owner is not that they are not selling enough. It is that too much of their money is permanently frozen inside the store itself, sitting on a rack, waiting for someone to pick it up. Let us start from the beginning and build this from the ground up. A gun store does not just sell guns. That is the first thing most people get wrong when they imagine this business from the outside. A store that sells only new firearms will not survive. The economics simply do not allow it. What a successful firearms retailer actually operates is a much broader retail ecosystem, and understanding each layer of that ecosystem is essential to understanding where the money is and where it disappears. The inventory of a functioning gun store typically includes new firearms, used firearms, ammunition across every common caliber, accessories like magazines and holsters and cleaning equipment, safety gear like range eye and ear protection, optics, and then an entirely separate category of services. Services include managing the federal transfer paperwork when a customer buys a firearm online and needs it shipped to a local dealer for the background check process, gunsmithing and basic repairs, and in some cases, range time or formal training programs where the licensing and space allow for it. Each of these categories behaves completely differently from a profitability standpoint, and that difference is where the entire economics of the business live. New firearms, the category every customer thinks about when they picture a gun store, carry an average gross margin of somewhere between 10 and 19%, depending on the brand, the distribution agreement, and the specific product. Shooting Industry magazine reported that firearms were averaging around 16.5% gross profit margin across the industry. To put that in plain terms, if a handgun sells at the counter for $600, the store paid somewhere around $501 for it at wholesale. The gross profit before a single operating expense is counted is $99. Used firearms, by contrast, can yield margins between 25 and 35% because the store typically acquires them through trade-ins at well below market value and then resells them with a healthier spread. Ammunition runs somewhere around 20 to 25%. Accessories and optics can hit 40, 50, or even higher on certain product categories. And services, because they are almost entirely labor with minimal material cost, can run key margins approaching 100% of the dollar billed to the customer. This is not a business where the most obvious product is the profit engine. The firearm brings the customer in through the front door. The ammunition, the accessories, the services, and the long-term repeat purchasing relationship are what actually keep the lights on and the staff paid month after month. Now let us talk about the expense that dominates everything else before we even get to operations. Inventory to open a functional, credible gun store in the United States today, industry estimates put the opening inventory requirement between $150,000 and $200,000 for a mid-sized storefront. That is the capital required just to stock the shelves before a single customer walks through the door. Not the rent deposit, not the security systems, not the first payroll, not the licenses, just the merchandise itself, sitting in the cases and on the racks. And that money is not sitting in a bank account earning interest or available to pay a surprise bill. It is merchandise, converting nothing until someone makes a purchase. This is the concept that separates people who understand retail from people who only like the idea of retail. Inventory has a cost that goes far beyond what you originally paid for it. When $150,000 is locked inside your display cases, that is $150,000 that cannot simultaneously pay this month's rent. It cannot cover the payroll you owe on Friday. It cannot be used to restock the high-margin accessories that just sold out and that customers are actively requesting. It cannot absorb an unexpected legal expense, a compliance fine, or surprise insurance premium increase. The capital is frozen, and a frozen business is a brittle business. Inventory also creates a structural problem that is specific to the distribution dynamics of this particular industry. The major wholesale distributors, companies like RSR Group, Sports South, Lipsy's, and others, do not let you simply cherry-pick only the best-selling products. To maintain your purchasing tier and get access to the popular fast-moving inventory your customers actually want, you often have to take slower-moving product alongside it. You buy what the distributor needs to clear in order to secure access to what your market demands. This means your shelves will always carry some percentage of dead stock, product that could sit for 6 months or a year before it sells. Every dollar tied up in dead stock is a dollar of working capital you cannot use for anything else until it eventually moves. A store can look like a successful business because its shelves are completely full while its operating bank account is sitting dangerously close to zero. That is not a metaphor. That is the actual operational condition of more gun stores than most people in this industry would be comfortable admitting publicly. Now let us layer in what the business actually costs to run every single month, before we even begin discussing what profit might look like. Rent for a retail space in a reasonable commercial location in a mid-size American city will run somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000 per month, depending on square footage and local market conditions. That number moves considerably higher in dense metro markets. Commercial utilities, and this matters in a specific way for a gun store, because metal inventory can be damaged by humidity and extreme temperature swings, run another $1,000 to $2,000 monthly on average. Security is not optional in this business, and it is not cheap. Federal regulations require licensed dealers to store firearms securely, which means alarm systems, surveillance systems, reinforced display cases, and often physical barriers outside the entrance. The hardware required for a proper security setup can run $20,000 to $40,000 as a one-time upfront cost, with monthly monitoring contracts and maintenance on top of that. Insurance in this industry is priced in a completely different category than standard retail. Because you are selling a regulated, high-liability product, your business is classified as high risk by most insurers, which means you are placed into a specialized insurance market with specialized premiums to match. First-year premiums for a modest-sized operation typically fall somewhere between $6,000 and $17,000 annually. That number can move dramatically upward based on your specific location and its crime statistics, your total inventory value, the quality of your security infrastructure, your liability exposure from any gunsmithing services, and your claims history. Two stores with identical top-line revenue can have profoundly different insurance costs, and that difference alone can separate a marginally viable business from one that is not viable at all. Then there is payment processing, and this is a cost that most people planning to open this type of business dramatically underestimate. Because the firearm industry is classified as a high-risk merchant category by payment networks and processors, the card processing fees charged to a gun store are meaningfully higher than what a standard clothing retailer or restaurant would pay. Where a typical retail business might pay between 1.5% and 2.5% of card transaction volume in processing fees, a gun store often pays between 3.5% and 5%. On $1 million in annual sales, that is a minimum of $35,000 going directly to payment processors before you have accounted for a single other expense. That is not a product. That is not a service. That is the cost of accepting the payment method the overwhelming majority of your customers use. Compliance software adds another layer. Every federally licensed firearms dealer is legally required to maintain detailed records of every firearm they acquire and every firearm they sell or transfer. The digital systems purpose-built for this, platforms like Bravo Store Systems, Fastbound, and others, run monthly subscription fees ranging from roughly $80 to $250, depending on the feature set and the transaction volume. That number is small relative to the others, but it sits on top of 30 other recurring costs that together build a fixed overhead structure that has to be covered every month, regardless of how strong or weak sales happen to be. Now let us talk about the part of this business that is genuinely different from almost every other retail category in America, and that is the compliance environment. A gun store is not a retail business that happens to have extra paperwork. It is a federally licensed operation, subject to active enforcement by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Every sale of a firearm requires a completed federal background check run through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, a fully completed firearms transaction record, and an entry in the Permanent Acquisition and Disposition Record the dealer is legally required to maintain. Every single transaction. A missed background check, a form with an empty required field, a recording error that seems trivial at the time, these are federal compliance violations. And in the current enforcement environment, federal compliance violations carry consequences that can reach all the way to permanent loss of the license. The data from fiscal year 2024 is not subtle about this. The ATF conducted just under 10,000 compliance inspections that year across the roughly 128,000 active licensed dealers in the country. Only 54% of the businesses inspected walked away clean. The other 46% had something wrong. And the agency revoked 195 federal firearms licenses in that single fiscal year, up from 157 revocations in 2023, up from just 88 in 2022. Federal courts have upheld consistently that a single willful violation of the Gun Control Act's regulations is sufficient legal basis for revocation. And willful in this context does not require criminal intent. It simply means you knew, or should have known, that the requirement existed. Think carefully about what license revocation actually means for the economics of the business. It does not mean the store closes temporarily and reopens after correcting the paperwork. It means the business cannot legally sell, transfer, or in many circumstances even hold the firearms that represent most of its inventory value. It means immediate legal fees to mount a defense, which in federal administrative proceedings can easily reach tens of thousands of dollars. It means the $200,000 worth of inventory you spent years building is now stranded. It means the customer relationships and the local reputation you spent years developing dissolve almost immediately because customers quickly shift to whoever can still legally serve them. And it means that if you are eventually able to reapply for licensing, your compliance history will follow you into every insurance renewal and every distributor relationship for years. Compliance is not an administrative overhead cost in this business. It is the operating condition on which everything else depends. Now let us talk about the people you need to actually run the store, because the staffing economics here are meaningfully more complicated than standard retail. A gun store employee is not a checkout clerk with product knowledge. They are simultaneously a customer service specialist, a technical product advisor, a frontline compliance officer, and a trained observer of transaction behavior. They need to know enough about the firearms, the ammunition, and the accessories they sell to credibly advise experienced buyers who often know their subject thoroughly. They need to understand the legal framework around what constitutes a legal sale versus an illegal one, including how to identify a potential straw purchase, which is when a buyer is attempting to acquire a firearm on behalf of someone who cannot legally own one. They need to execute transactions correctly in the compliance software, and they need to maintain the physical security awareness required in a business that holds valuable, portable, dangerous merchandise in publicly accessible display cases. A knowledgeable, experienced, compliant gun store employee in most American markets commands between $15 and $22 per hour, and experienced employees who understand the compliance requirements can command more. A lean but capable operation with 3 or 4 full-time employees is looking at monthly payroll of roughly $15,000 to $20,000 before employer payroll taxes and any benefits. And turnover is expensive in a way that is amplified in this environment specifically because the training period for a replacement employee is not just about learning the products. It is about rebuilding the institutional compliance knowledge and the customer trust that takes months to develop. Every new hire is a liability gap until they are fully trained, and a compliance mistake during that gap has consequences that extend far beyond the individual transaction. A poorly trained employee in this business does not just cost their wage. They can cost the entire license. Now let us talk about what the customer is actually buying, because understanding this changes how you see the entire revenue structure of the business. When a customer walks into a gun store and considers purchasing a firearm, they are almost never buying purely on price. In a world where the exact same serialized product can be found online, at a large sporting goods chain, and at the local independent store, the customer who chooses the independent store is buying something that does not appear on any price tag. They are buying the expertise of the staff member who answers their specific question correctly. They are buying the confidence that the transaction will be handled correctly and legally. They are buying the ability to handle the product, ask questions, and make an informed decision rather than guessing from a product listing photo. They are buying the proximity and convenience of having a trusted local source for future needs. And they are buying the reputation of the store, which in a business involving personal safety decisions carries weight that is genuinely difficult to quantify but very real in its commercial effect. This dynamic has significant economic implications. A store that competes primarily on price against online retailers and large chains is fighting a battle it is structurally set up to lose because those competitors operate with cost structures the independent store cannot match. A store that competes on expertise, trust, service, and community relationship is operating in a different market entirely. One where customers are far less likely to defect over a $50 price difference and far more likely to return repeatedly and bring other customers with them. The lifetime value of a loyal customer to a gun store is substantial. A customer who purchases a first firearm, then returns for ammunition, then brings back a used firearm for trade-in credit toward a new one, then purchases accessories and cleaning supplies across multiple visits, and then eventually purchases a second or third firearm over a period of years is worth dramatically more to the business than the margin on that initial sale. Some industry analysts tracking this data have reported average customer lifetime values of several hundred to over $800 per acquired customer. When the cost of acquiring that customer through local advertising and community presence is somewhere between $30 and $60, the math on relationship-based retention becomes one of the most powerful financial levers in the entire business model. Now let us assemble all of this into a real number that tells the actual story. Assume a well-managed independent gun store generates exactly $1 million in top-line sales in a given year. $1 million sounds like a serious business. Let us trace what actually happens to that revenue on its way to the owner's pocket. The cost of the inventory sold to generate that $1 million runs at roughly 80% of revenue in a store whose sales are weighted toward new firearms. That is $800,000 exiting the business on day one of each transaction, leaving $200,000 in gross profit to cover all further expenses. Payroll for a lean, competent 4-person staff costs roughly $80,000 for the year. Rent and utilities take another $40,000. Payment processing at 3.5% of revenue extracts $35,000, which goes directly to the processor before it ever touches the operating account. Insurance and security systems cost $15,000 to $20,000. Compliance software and point-of-sale technology costs around $5,000. Marketing, accounting fees, legal fees, and the dozens of miscellaneous operating expenses that accumulate across a year consume the last $15,000. Add those deductions up. $800,000 in inventory cost, $80,000 in payroll, $40,000 in rent, $35,000 in processing fees, $20,000 in insurance and security, $5,000 in software, $15,000 in miscellaneous expenses. Total deductions from that $1 million in revenue, $995,000. Net profit remaining, $5,000 to $10,000. If the math falls precisely as modeled and nothing unexpected happens during the year, $5,000 to $10,000. On $1 million in sales, and the owner who generated that result almost certainly worked 60 to 70 hours a week doing it. They were the manager, the compliance officer, the buyer, the negotiator with distributors, the person who handled the ATF inspector's visit, the one who dealt with every difficult customer situation and every operational crisis. If you valued that labor at a fair market rate for someone with their expertise and responsibility, somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000 per year, the business did not generate a profit at all. It generated a demanding, high-stress, high-liability job that the owner paid themselves to work. The real measure of a business is not whether revenue exceeded expenses. It is whether the profit generated, after accounting for the owner's actual labor at a fair rate, produces a return on the capital invested that justifies the risk taken. And in a business where $250,000 to $400,000 of startup capital is required, where license revocation is a persistent operational risk, and where the net profit margin on $1 million in sales can fall below 1%. That question has to be answered honestly before anyone signs a lease. The path to making this business genuinely work, not just survive but produce real returns, runs through a specific set of operational disciplines. Profitable operators in this industry manage inventory turnover almost obsessively. They track how long every product category sits before it moves, they identify dead stock early, and they liquidate it at a loss rather than letting it calcify into frozen capital that suffocates the rest of the business. They deliberately shift their floor space and purchasing budget toward the categories that actually produce margin, which means accessories, used firearms, and services rather than new firearms. They build the customer relationships that generate repeat business because the lifetime value math is simply too good to ignore. They negotiate payment processing terms wherever possible and continuously look for ways to reduce the percentage of revenue that exits through that channel. They build compliance infrastructure that is genuinely airtight, not because they enjoy paperwork, but because a single compliance failure costs more than years of compliance software subscriptions combined. And they understand, sometimes painfully, that the gun in the display case is not the product. The gun is the mechanism that introduces a customer to the ecosystem. The customer who comes back is the asset. So how much can the owner of a well-run gun store actually make? The answer depends almost entirely on the variables the owner can control. Location and local market dynamics matter enormously. Product mix and the discipline to prioritize high-margin categories over volume matters. The quality of the customer base and the time invested in building genuine loyalty matters. Operational efficiency and the management of fixed costs matters. And compliance always matters. Operators who get all of these variables right over a period of several years can build businesses that produce genuine, sustainable six-figure net income. Operators who get even one or two of them consistently wrong rarely make it to year 3. The gun store industry generates roughly $14 billion in annual revenue across the United States, according to data from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. That is not a small industry, but that revenue is spread across tens of thousands of locations, squeezed by thin margins on the anchor product, and continuously pressured by online competition, regulatory costs, and a fixed expense structure that does not forgive slow months. Before the final thought, a quick mention. If you are thinking about starting or growing a business in any industry, there is a detailed business guide in the description and pinned in the first comment below this video. It covers the financial fundamentals that most people never think through clearly enough until they are already in the middle of a problem. Worth reading before you commit to anything. So is a gun store a good business? It can be, but only for someone who walks into it with a complete and accurate picture of what it actually is. It is an inventory management operation that must generate enough turnover to justify the capital it consumes. It is a compliance operation where a single paperwork failure carries consequences no other retail business faces in the same way. It is a trust-based retail relationship that takes years to build and can be destroyed overnight. And it is a cash flow management exercise that requires the owner to constantly track the distance between the money sitting on the shelves and the money needed to run the business. The shelves may be stocked with some of the most expensive merchandise of any retail store in any American strip mall. But the real asset of a gun store that actually works is not what is sitting behind the glass. It is the management discipline, the compliance precision, the customer trust, and the operational system that can convert that inventory into cash consistently without losing control of the cost that would otherwise consume every dollar of it. If you found this video valuable, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. It is the easiest way to support this work and make sure you do not miss what comes next. Thank you for watching.